Hello and welcome everyone back to our fall study, Believe in Me, Jesus in the Gospel of John. And today we will be in John chapter 4. And I'm really excited about this because I think with some of the material that we have learned about how John is structured and how these replacements of Jesus for these Jewish institutions work, that this text reads so richly. And so it's, I'm excited to get into it. Before we do that, let's review what we learned in our last lesson, Jesus in the temple and with the rabbi. What stood out to you about Jesus in the temple? We'll do the temple first.
They call it his father's house and going to clean.
Yeah, so that intimacy, my Father's house, like that direct feeling of ownership where the heir has come into the temple and seems to have the authority to say what should happen in the temple. Yeah, what else?
I keep reflecting on the fact that we've done a transition. When they come to the temple to worship, they had to travel from long far away. And we're seeing a transition to the temple becoming our body.
Okay, so Jesus said, he made his claim. He pointed to his sign. What was his sign? He said, here's a sign. They said, I'll give you a sign. And Jesus said, here it is.
Tear it down in 3 days and I'll rebuild it.
Yeah.
Tear it down, I'll rebuild it.
Destroy this temple and I will rebuild it in 3 days. And that was the sign he gave. But then John tells us, that was the temple of his body. And so we are seeing that change, that switch, right? And eventually we see that we also are the temple of the Spirit of Jesus Christ. And so that is a shift that we're seeing Jesus make right here at this time. Now, watch out for some of that same kind of shift in today's lesson, right? So we will see that continue. Great point. Okay, what else?
I've always been frustrated when I read the Old Testament and the amount of animals they had to sacrifice. As the world grows, that's not sustainable.
Okay, so the volume of sacrifice. Now, keep in mind that much of what was sacrificed went to feed people as well, right? So those items were not, lest we think like, oh, what a waste. And some were whole burnt offerings, but very much of that would feed the priestly tribes, or sometimes, depending on what kind of sacrifice, the sacrificer would take then the pieces and celebrate with the family. And so the temple sacrifices also had an air of celebration in them that we get in the sense of like the Messianic banquet in our lesson 2 weeks ago, right? Yeah, good. What else? Sharon came up to me after our sermon on Sunday. Did you want to say something, or should I just kind of? We talked a little bit about the temple that came up, and she said, but the temple is the body, right? This is what Linda's referring to. Also, we saw here Jesus' replacement, not just of the temple, but of all of God's pursuit of being with humankind, right, is now focused in Jesus, who comes to be in our midst. And so one way that we can think of the story of the Old Testament, there are different ways, of course, but one way is God's pursuit of dwelling with mankind, and mankind running, failing. And so here is Jesus to do that. The new temple, not just in his body, but in the sense of like, this is where heaven and earth meet. This is where God dwells with us. So what a beautiful thing. Let's talk about Jesus with the rabbi. What did we learn about Nicodemus? What stood out of that section?
Well, he came in secret.
Okay, so it says he came at night, right? And that sense of darkness. And John never fails to mean something symbolic when he includes these sorts of details. We're going to contrast that today. Watch out for what time of day it is as we get to today's lesson, right? Nicodemus came in at night, and there was a sense that he was coming not fully publicly, right? He was coming without committing publicly to discipleship with Jesus, right? And he, because of his, we talked about like he's just not there yet. He sees some things about Jesus, but he hasn't fully come into the light. And because of that, he was not able to understand much of what Jesus said. And so we saw Jesus has replaced the institution of the rabbi, the teacher of Israel. Jesus is the new teacher of Israel. And just as Nicodemus still needs to choose whether to fully trust in Jesus, so do we still, we constantly are presented the opportunity to continue to grow in trust of Jesus. Yeah.
That very thought just popped in my head. I'm like, oh, well, maybe that's why I don't understand.
Okay, Sharon said maybe sometimes when I don't understand, it's because I don't trust in Jesus. Okay, so sometimes when we don't understand, we don't have all the background information, right? And that's part of what we're doing here, right? We're examining some of the background information. I have been working ahead a little bit, and I've been working on our lesson next week. And there's a section where Jesus brings up some things that you go, how are those connected? And they're connected because of the teachings of the rabbis at the time. And so we'll go into that. Sometimes you need background information, right? And that's some of what we're doing here. And sometimes we need to trust in Jesus more. we want to be open, right, to that idea, to that call, to that invitation. All right, well, let's move into chapter 4. Would someone please read John 4, 1 through 6?
I'll do it.
Thank you.
Now, Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard that he was gaining and baptizing more disciples than John, although in fact it was not Jesus who baptized, but his disciples. So he left Judea and went back once more to Galilee. Now he had to go through Samaria. So he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there. And Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well, and it was about noon.
Okay, thank you. All right, so let's first address, there's sort of a couple of interesting little bits at the beginning here. We might wonder why Jesus is moving locations, and we see there is some jealousy, some comparison with John. And we skipped the previous passage here because for time we didn't do it, but we see that some Jews were stirring up competition between Jesus and John. And so we see down in 4:1, oh, that Jew was a Pharisee. Interesting to note, right? We have a little bit of foreshadowing here where the antagonism of the Jewish leadership is already sort of pushing on Jesus' ministry and making an impact on what he does.
Now, is he going to Galilee because he's going to see John again?
No, he's coming. I don't think so. No, I think he's leaving an area and going to an area where, so in the Synoptics, we get lots of time Jesus spends teaching in Galilee. In John, remember, John likes to sort of give us a concentrate the story of Jesus in Jerusalem, right? And so but we know Jesus spent a lot of time teaching in Galilee. So this is one of those times. In a way, this is sort of representative of his ministry in Galilee.
Okay. It wasn't clear why Jesus would do that, but John mentioned it, he had to have something.
Right. And Jesus did spend a lot of time in Galilee ministering there. We get more of the sort of story of that in the synoptics, right?
Something I read when I was looking at some of this is the fact that they would have normally gone along the river, the Jordan River, around Samaria,
Okay.
but that instead Jesus went straight through Samaria, which may have been his design to set up this teaching moment. We don't really know, but there was,
Yeah, because look at what it says. It says in verse 4, what does it say about Jesus passing through Samaria? He needed to. He had to, right? Our translations will have something that indicates that Jesus says it must be. But we know geographically it didn't have to be. Lots of times Jews went around.
And it usually was that they went around to avoid Samaria.
Specifically to avoid Samaria. So when John tells us Jesus had to, needed to go through Samaria, needed to, how so?
He knew this woman was there.
Okay.
And it was going to be.
This is an encounter that matters, right? This encounter is important. It's important for Jesus, and John is telling us that it was important all along. This is not a chance encounter. Jesus had to for the sake of his ministry, right? And where does he end up? At Jacob's well, this place named Sychar. This is probably near Shechem. It's a historically important well. Traditionally, it was dug by Jacob, one of the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the three sort of patriarchs of Israel, even before the Exodus, are those three patriarchs. And Jacob's name was changed to Israel. That's where we get the name of the nation of Israel. And this would have been on land he purchased probably in Genesis 33:18. So the story of this well is not in the Old Testament, but we get a story of him purchasing land, and we think that's where this well is located. It was when he returned to the land and reconciled with his brother Esau. Okay, so there's a well. Jesus ends up next to the well. What did a well mean in this culture?
Drawing water.
Drawing water. Nobody has running water at their houses. We must go for water. It's a daily task. It's very important. Who would go for water? The women, right? A well is a place that women go.
It's a community gathering.
A community gathering place for half the community for the women, right? If you happened to do the study questions, I gave you 3 passages to look at. Did anyone look at those? And someone summarize what those 3 passages were about?
They're all surrounded by, they all have a well and they're all feeding their animals.
Okay, each one centers on a well geographically, okay?
One is watering sheep, one is watering camels.
Right.
They encounter men.
Okay. They encounter men, and then what?
Women that
That they end up marrying, okay? The well is a scene, like you have heard of literary tropes, maybe. It's very common in certain genres of fiction now to talk about certain literary tropes. Like there may be like the grumpy detective, right, trope. The in romance literature, we hear the enemies to lovers trope. Like these are literary tropes. Well, the Old Testament has a literary trope around finding a bride at a well. Okay. So Jesus is a single man. He's dismissed the disciples, right? They've gone, and he's just at a well by himself. And so, what an interesting setup for a story we have here. So the original readers would be like, oh, a man at a well. This is interesting. Okay.
All he wants is a drink of water.
Say again, Sandy.
All he wants is a drink of water. Not a lot.
Okay. All right. So Sandy said all he wants is a drink of water, but I think let's hold that and see if that's all he wants as he's going. Not a wife, I agree. But what does he want? Let's watch for that. And then somebody else over here said something. Linda.
It was God-led men. Every one of these men came with
Okay,
praying.
these are patriarchs. This was Isaac, this was Jacob, this was Moses. These were people who found their brides at a well, and these were people who were led by God. Okay, Carrie?
Old Testament stories into
Yeah,
I
definitely.
think there's a thread both in the Old Testament and this story too, in terms of uniting groups of people. In the Old Testament, these are maybe tribes or families or whatever that are somehow joining together through this marriage, which is often a brokered union, not necessarily a cute meet.
Yes, yes. It's not a romance novel and yet.
Exactly. Yeah, so it's a bigger deal. The
Okay.
marriage. And then this with Jesus, you're seeing eventually kind of a joining of two cultures that were very much at odds through this event.
Yes, let's hold on to that. That's such a great point. So there is a joining of two cultures. Moses meets Zipporah. You know, that's not an Israelite. So we have this a sense of joining of cultures that happens through these marriages. Yeah, absolutely. What a great point. Okay. So original reader would have these wife meeting stories at the top of mind. Another thing to notice, what time is it? Noon. Okay. If it was night and the lights were dark in the theater of John's story with Nicodemus, right now the sun is at the top of the sky. All the lights are on in the theater of this story, right? So we're setting up for something here in the time of day. Okay. Someone read for us 7 through 14, please.
When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" His disciples had gone in to him their food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "You're a Jew, and I'm a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink?" For Jews do not associate with Samaritans. Jesus answered her, "You knew the gift of God. If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him and he would have given you living water." And how far?
14.
"Sir," the woman said, "you have nothing to draw water with, and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did also his sons and his flocks and his herds?" Jesus answered, "Everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks the water I give him will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give him will become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life."
Thank you. Okay. So along comes a woman of Samaria to draw water. Now, do some of you ever have like a walking date with friends? Do you ever do that? What time of day do you go? Early. We go early. Why? It's cooler. What time do you suppose women normally went to the well to draw their water? Early morning. Just, head over there just as soon as it gets light, get your water. Water's heavy. Hauling water is a chore. And so they go early in the morning, and that would have been the community time for these women. Also, sometimes at dusk. When is this woman coming to the well? What's she doing there at noon? Probably avoiding the other women. Yeah, we have probably a picture of a woman who is ostracized from her community, that she is ending up at the well at noon when none of the other women go. Now, in this culture, it was traditional for a man alone, if he meets a woman alone and he's not related to her, right, I see you shaking your heads, he would normally just back away. But instead, Jesus not only stands his ground at the well, where it says he sat right down. It's kind of a storyteller's flourish in the Greek, like Jesus sat right down at the well. Not only does he stay there, and he's an obstacle. She needs to get the water. She needs to get to the well. She's already waited till noon. But he asks her, he engages her, he speaks to her, and asks her for a drink. What is so weird about that?
Well, because she's not expecting him to talk to her at all.
She's not. What does she say? What's her objection to him talking to her?
Jews do not speak to Samaritans.
Jews don't speak to Samaritans. So one thing that's weird about this is that it's a single man and a single woman, and so he would normally walk away. But it's huge that Jews don't even touch the same utensils that Samaritans use. What is he going to drink from her drawing, her cup?
He didn't have a utensil.
She said you have nothing to draw with. So is he going to drink from hers? This is very charged, right? This is very strange. She recognized it because her response is equivalent to like, why are you talking to me? You wouldn't normally talk to me.
How did she know he was a Jew?
Yeah.
What is this?
The way
The way he's dressed?
he was dressed, probably.
Probably the way he was dressed.
The way he keeps his beard?
Beard, hair.
He is probably, this will come up again, he is probably dressed as a rabbi.
Oh.
Jewish rabbis had distinctive dress, and he is probably dressed as a rabbi. And so she is like, it's not only obvious that he's a Jew, but probably that he's a teacher in the Jews.
Can you speak briefly to the issues between these two groups of people and exactly why they hate each other so much?
Okay, we need this information for later. Okay, so we'll go ahead and say it now because we're gonna want it, right? Why do Jews and Samaritans not get along? So Samaria was the group that was the northern kingdom of Israel. So when Solomon reigned, those were the glory days of Israel. That was about those three people centered about 1000 BC, and everything was united and rich and prosperous and victorious in battles, and they had all this land. Well, Solomon's son did not handle things well. This is the story of Jeroboam and Rehoboam. Rehoboam is Solomon's son. Jeroboam is a upstart. And those kingdoms divided. So that first we have, the Solomon line, David's line, going to the smaller group, which is in Judah and contains Jerusalem. And then we have the larger group, they say it 2 tribes and 10 tribes. The larger group in the north is Israel, and that is the division that goes with Jeroboam. Well, they continue divided all the way through the exile. And Israel, which does not contain Jerusalem, immediately recognizes, how are we going to maintain our national autonomy if we send people to worship in Jerusalem? How is that going to work for us? I think it's not going to work. We better set up our own religious worship. And so they do this by setting up 2 golden calves, one at the south of Israel and one at the north of Israel. Really, people? Golden calves? Didn't we learn in Exodus that golden calves were a really bad idea? This is what Jeroboam does. He sets up high places with the golden calves and says, worship Yahweh here. He still says you're going to worship Yahweh, but he does it with golden calves. Right? You shall make no idols. You shall make no statues of Yahweh, right? Or of other gods. And he does it outside Jerusalem. And so Israel really, there's not another good king in Israel the rest of their history. And they go into exile from Assyria earlier than the southern kingdom goes into exile. Southern kingdom, Babylon takes them into exile, and Babylon means Persians. Cyrus sends them back. And they come back as they're still Hebrews. They're Jews. They are ethnically Jews when they come back. Samaria, which is a kind of a new name for the northern kingdom of Israel after this town of Samaria is where one of their worst kings, Ahab, remember Ahab and Jezebel? Okay, Ahab sets the capital in Samaria, and so this whole region becomes called Samaria. They get intermixed with these other nations. They never come back as Jews. They come back as a mixed people that we now call Samaritans, new name. Okay, that's how we get Samaria. Now, sometimes we will find when we look through history that a people that is mixed from what we used to be is there's more antagonism between them than just another people altogether, right? And so that is the antagonism between Jews and Samaritans, that they are mixed and that that their worship practices are corrupted. They don't worship in Jerusalem. This is a huge problem for Jews, that, beginning with these golden calves and Jeroboam, and they're corrupted from the inside.
Is it true that they only believed in the Torah as opposed to other parts of the scripture?
So the Sadducees only believed in the Torah. I'm not sure. They definitely did believe in the Torah, but it wasn't, the Torah is pretty adamant about worshiping in Jerusalem at the tabernacle, and then it points forward to the temple, even though, there wasn't a Jerusalem during that historical period. That still says you'll have centralized worship. And yet the Samaritans don't go to Jerusalem to worship because they're not welcome, and it's not their place, and that's not their nation, right?
Still worshiping Yahweh? Possible.
Debatable, some, yes.
So they still feel Abraham's their forefather?
Yes, Abraham is their forefather.
They have some of these core beliefs that the Jews have,
But
then at a point they kind of draw the line and diverge.
The diversion happens with Assyrian exile and intermixed with these other communities.
At a point in history they kind of...
Yes, or you could draw the line at the divided kingdom, at Jeroboam and Rehoboam, and say, well, we divided there, we never came back together. Okay, I didn't mean to spend that long on that.
No,
Sorry, everyone.
Briefly,
But we need to know that to understand what
is
Jesus is
such a
talking
big
about later.
deal?
Yeah, it is a big deal. And we remember that the Jews, we talked about zeal last week, right? That zeal is the protection, even by violence, of Israel from corruption from the inside. And here are an example of a people that have become, like, their Jewishness has become completely corrupted, and they're not even Jews anymore from the inside, because of this whole series of Old Testament events. Okay.
The interesting thing I find here too, she knows he's not supposed to talk to her, she's not supposed to talk to him. She chooses to stay and have a discussion, which I find interesting.
Say more about that. What do you think?
It kind of goes along with the fact that, as we'll read later on, she had 5 husbands, so she's thrown a lot of convention out the window.
Maybe.
And is a bit of a rebel.
Maybe so. But so John is presenting her as someone who's willing,
Right.
even she doesn't know anything when she walks up.
Mhm.
She's just like, why are you talking to me? You're a Jew.
Yeah.
But she's willing to stay and have that conversation. Gavin.
And she's also an outcast among her people.
Yeah, so maybe
So
she's,
she doesn't seem to care much what they think.
what's the point of caring what they think, right? Also, maybe lonely,
Right.
right?
That was one of the things that I wrote down when I was listening, like, this woman
This sounds lonely.
is seeking someone to love her.
And, okay.
To care about her, to have companionship with, and we don't know why all of her.
Right, and hold on to that because we haven't gotten to that. So let's think about that when we get. But yes, absolutely. Okay.
She never did give him water.
Well, it doesn't say she may have given him water while they're talking.
A curated version of the conversation, so we don't know everything. Yeah. Okay. So she says, why are you talking to me? What does Jesus answer? He doesn't really answer. Jesus never is answering the questions that are asked, right? What does Jesus answer about instead? In verse 10.
He talks about living water.
Yeah, if you knew who I was, you would ask me for water. And he specifically says living water. Now, living water is a technical term. This is a term for water that is acceptable for ritual purification. So when the Jews, remember when they filled up the jars at the wedding in Cana, all those 180 gallons, up to 180 gallons, they went and filled them up with water. They would have had to fill that with living water, water that came, they would call it from the hand of God. So this would be from a river, from rainwater collection that is flowing and moving, not stagnant, from a spring, a natural spring, not water that's from a well. And so he says, you have dead water. I could give you living water. And at this place in Sychar, there are no rivers around. There are no springs. There is no place for Jesus to get the living water, right? And so she says what in verse 12?
Are you greater than Jacob?
Are you greater than our father Jacob? Well, what answer is implied for us, the reader? Yeah, he is, right? Remember, each one of these institutions, we have seen Jesus replace something, right? So are you greater than our father Jacob? What is Jacob's other name? Israel, right? Is Jesus greater than Israel? And so this is what is in the air as Jesus answers the questions. He doesn't answer directly, right? Again, what does he say?
If you drink this water, you're going to be thirsty again.
Never thirst if you drink my water. This water, thirsty again. If you drink my water, you will never thirst. You will have a well of water springing up to eternal life. So Jesus has shifted his metaphor, as John loves to really blend his metaphors, right? This always happens in the book of John. Some English teachers would not approve, but he does it effectively. So that's how it goes you're allowed to break rules if you do it well. Living water is normally for washing from the outside to become ritually clean to enter what? The temple. Why? Because to be pure to enter the temple. Why do you have to be pure to enter the temple? Presence of God, right? That's where God is. So ritually clean to enter the presence of God, Jesus is talking about taking it in and having the ability to be in the presence of God from the inside out. So it's an incredible offer. Let's read 15 through 26. Would someone do that? Thank you.
The woman said to him, Sir, give me this water so I won't get thirsty and have to keep coming here to draw water. He told her, Go call your husband and come back. I have no husband, she replied. Jesus said to her, You are right when you say you have no husband. In fact, the fact is you have had 5 husbands, and the husband you now have is not your husband. What you have to say is quite true. Sir, the woman said, I can see that you are a prophet. Our ancestors worshiped on this mountain. But you Jews claim that the place where you must worship in Jerusalem. Woman, Jesus replied, believe me, the time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. But you Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know, for salvation is for the Jews. Yet a time is coming and has now come when the true worshipers will worship the Father in the Spirit and in truth. For they are the kind of worshipers the Father seeks. God is Spirit, and his worshipers must worship in the Spirit and in truth. Keep going.
Yeah, all the way through 26.
Okay. The woman said, I know that Messiah, called Jesus, is coming. When he comes, he will explain everything to us. Then Jesus declared, I am the one speaking to you, I am he.
Okay, very good. All right, there's a lot in there, so let's go back and kind of go through it in order, starting at the beginning. So we get a little hint of that ironic misunderstanding that we talked about last week, where she says, well, give me this water so I won't have to keep coming here. But why does she not want to keep coming here? The way she's treated, she doesn't want to come at noon. She doesn't want to be here in the heat of the day, cut off from all the other women. And so is Jesus changing the subject in verse 16? Yes, and maybe no, right? Because maybe she has sort of led into her difficulty in her life. And so Jesus says, go call your husband. Why do you think Jesus broaches this element of her life? Why does he, if we're calling it change the subject, why does he change the subject?
I think it's to let her know who he is. To let her know he knows her life, and she hasn't even said a word.
Yes.
And that, if she honestly understands, you know all about me, but yet you don't know me, or I've never met you before, but you know all about me.
Yeah. Other thoughts?
I wonder if he's giving her an opportunity to be honest or to be dishonest. Because if he says go call your husband, I mean, she could have said, oh, he's busy.
He's out in the field.
She admits.
Yeah.
She just kind of.
Yeah, and I think, she's at the point of accepting or not accepting Jesus, right? He has offered her living water, this beautiful invitation. Can she really do that with pretense between them? What were you going to say, Linda?
He's given her a way out.
Yeah.
She could make a choice. This is getting kind of uncomfortable, and I shouldn't be talking here. And he's just said, go. But she chooses not to.
She chooses not to. Great point.
To talk to a stranger than it is someone you know.
Yeah, and someone who knows the problems, right? And so there is this pretense between them, and Jesus kind of sweeps it away, doesn't he? Right? A story of this woman and her 5 husbands. Go ahead.
If you've ever seen the TV show The Chosen, it's a fantastic scene.
Oh, I bet. I have not seen it.
And they keep all the essentials of what everything you're describing, but in this part, they actually ad lib. He describes all 5 of her husbands.
Oh, my.
He names them. He says, this one was like this, but then this one treated you nice, but you left him because you didn't think you deserved to be treated nice.
Okay, well, so.
And you can see her face. It's a great scene.
Okay, so I have heard wonderful things about the series The Chosen. I haven't seen that, and maybe there's something to it, but I want to point out, in this culture, women could not divorce their husbands. Women had no prerogative to divorce their husbands. They could only be divorced. They could only be dismissed or cast out. And we remember that adultery is a capital crime. Adultery is punishable to death by stoning. And so it's very unlikely that this woman is a serial adulteress with her husbands, right? On the other hand, just for accuracy's sake, we do not have good historical information about this period, and it may be that the Roman Empire didn't allow that stoning, and so we don't really know. And yet, normally, if a woman was divorced, it's because she was cast out. And so this woman has been cast out 5 times. Think about how vulnerable a woman is in a society where you have to be married to have protection. And this man she is with now has not extended her the protection of marriage. She is so vulnerable. And here is Jesus in front of her, speaking to her like her need for water might matter. And so this is a completely different experience than being cast out. She's been cast out by her husband, and so she's been ostracized by her community. What does she have? And here is Jesus. You know, you talked about that possible loneliness and where she might live in that. Jesus may be the only man who has spoken to her with dignity in this way.
Something that could be going on too, and they usually did not have much say in the marriage, being married at all. They were handled like property or chattel or whatever.
Right.
And it's possible, it doesn't say, of course, this is just a thought of mine, is that maybe she is not able to have children because of the importance of having children in that society, and that showing your worth through being able to bear children, that maybe she was barren.
And that's why she is cast out.
And cast out several times because she couldn't bear a child. It's a thought.
It's a good thought. It could happen. It absolutely could happen. Yeah. We don't know.
She could be a victim, and this is none of her fault.
Right. And so we often think of her as an immoral woman that Jesus is speaking to. I think we want to think of her as a vulnerable woman that Jesus is speaking to. And so, you know, he's addressing her like her needs matter. And she's immediately going to say, what does she call him in verse 19? Yeah. And the word sir is kurios. This is the word for Lord. It's used for sir and it's used for Lord. And so he's the Lord and he's the prophet. When we start getting the names of Jesus, what do we start to recognize? True discipleship is coming, right? Okay, I perceive you are a prophet, but she knows that a Jewish prophet is not really for a Samaritan woman, right? So she starts asking him about a point of contention between Jews and Samaritans, right? I think she's looking for how this prophet that is speaking directly to her, such a surprise, how does he fit into the landscape of this religious argument, and why has it come to me, right? Jesus uses her opening, say, well, you Jews say, what does she bring up? What's the point of contention she brings up?
Place of worship.
Place of worship. All the way back to Jeroboam and Rehoboam, right? This is the issue, right? All the way through the time in between. The northern kingdom should have been going to Jerusalem, weren't. They were worshiping on the high places. Idolatry was worshiping a different god like Baal, worshiping Yahweh through a statue, or worshiping away from the temple where you were supposed to worship. And so she's bringing up this issue that has been the historical issue through 1,000 years. What is Jesus' response? This is crazy talk.
He wants her just to believe him.
Okay, in 21 through 24, what does he say about worship and what matters?
It says you Samaritans worship what you do not know.
Okay.
And it says we worship what we do know.
Okay, so there's a real difference between the Jews and Samaritans. Keep going.
And I'm a little confused on that, but we'll talk about that. For salvation is from the Jews. Yet a time is coming and has now come when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for they are the kind of worshipers the Father seeks.
Okay.
Wow.
It is wow. All right, so first of all, he says, neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. Radical. This is a very crazy, strange surprising thing for a Jew to say, right? Now, why is it that we say salvation is from the Jews? Let's talk about that briefly, and then we'll get into the rest of what I had planned to talk about here.
Jesus is a Jew.
Okay, Jesus is a Jew.
They are the chosen people.
Okay, chosen for what? When were they chosen and what were they chosen for?
Bring the Messiah into the world.
Right.
To bring salvation, Messiah into the world. When were they chosen?
Abraham.
Way back in Abraham, right? And the promise to Abraham is that I will bless all nations of the world through you, right? So every time a person or a group is chosen in Scripture, they are chosen not against the others, but for the sake of the others. This is what being chosen means, and it means that all the way to us, right? This is what it means for us to be chosen, to be followers of Jesus Christ, is for the sake of other people, right? And so the Jews were chosen they weren't called Jews then, right? Abraham, all the history, that's like 2,000 years, right? 2,000 years of history. The Jews have been supposed to be a light to the nations. And here, finally, through Jesus Christ, that light to the nations has come in the person of Jesus, God in the flesh. So that's why salvation is from the Jews. It was always the purpose to choose one to bless the others, right? Okay, so Jesus says, an hour is coming and has come. Hear those both? It is coming, which means that it's still in the future, and it has come, which means it is now. And we talked about what the kingdom of God was last week. Remember that? The kingdom of God is the sphere where God's will lives in reality. And that's why the kingdom of God can exist in my heart, even though the kingdom of God has not suffused the entire world, right? Does everything happen in this world according to what God would want things to be? No, world is still broken. And yet the kingdom of God breaks into the current age in the person of Jesus Christ right here. So it is coming, and it has now come. It's coming because Jesus is bringing it more fully through the church, through the history, all the way till he comes again. And it has come because Jesus is here. So he says, neither this mountain in Jerusalem. Why not? True worshipers worship what? God. In what way?
In spirit.
In spirit and in truth. This is a completely new paradigm of worship, isn't it? Jesus is bringing her a new way to worship would be through the Spirit, who we will, we're still learning here in John, right? At this point in John, from our perspective as readers who know who Jesus is and know what happens, the Spirit of Jesus Christ will be coming into the world, and that will create new worship, right?
It's interesting, this story follows the story of tear down the temple.
Yes.
And I'll build it again.
Yes. And you can tear down the temple, and the temple will be permanently torn down eventually. And it's okay because the Spirit of Jesus Christ is in us to bring the kingdom of God into the world. Go ahead.
Is he also, sounds like he's also foretelling at the crucifixion, the temple will be rendered useless because the veil will be destroyed. But then also in 70 AD, the temple itself will be completely destroyed. So I feel like he's also foretelling that you're not going to worship the temple at Jerusalem anymore.
Right.
Because you can't.
Because you can't, right? And this would have been written after that destruction. And so the original readers of these passages would be reading it from a perspective of having lost the temple to Roman destruction. Yeah, absolutely. Great point.
Interesting layer of stories.
Yes, yeah. So Jesus has just negated the entire basis of division between Jews and Samaritans for all of this history, right? He's just sweeping it all away. It won't be about the holy places like this historic well, like the temple. It won't be about, and I think we were onto this earlier, it won't be about religious and ethnic identities. Instead, the Spirit will be available because look, God is looking for worshipers. This is good news. What an amazing testimony to what's available God is looking for people who recognize God and want to be a part of the kingdom of God. He's looking, actively pursuing us, and we have it right here. And, you know, the woman is probably a little flabbergasted, right? This is weird. This is kind of this strange. And she says, well, someone's going to explain all this. Who's going to explain it all? Well, in verse 25, who is she expecting to come explain it all? Messiah.
She is not realizing that he is the Messiah.
She's not, but what does Jesus say?
I am he.
I am he. Okay.
Is that the first time he identifies himself as Christ?
Okay, so Linda says, is that the first time he identifies himself as Messiah? So in some ways, depending on how you take it, this is his only time among the Samaritans. This is the only time kind of in the first half, especially, that he says, I'm the Messiah. That's me. I'm the Messiah. He does that among the Samaritans in a way that he doesn't do openly yet among the Jews, probably because his time has not yet come. And that's an escalating kind of thing to say, right? And it's not time for that to escalate yet.
Or often among the Jews, he's saying, who do you say I am?
Okay.
But
Look
maybe
at
he
the
felt
words.
safe here because he knew how that people were. And
You get
try
this.
and get them to believe.
Yes.
To tell them.
He is more able to say, they're not going, later some people come and try to make him king by force, like that's not going to happen in Samaria. And so maybe he is more able to say so. Look at the words he uses. He says, literally, my translation says, I who speak to you am he, but literally this says, I am the one speaking to you. And this I am is what? What is I am? It's God, right? It's Yahweh. It's the name that God says in Exodus 3 when he says, I am who I am. Yeah, Gavin.
It's very interesting that among the sworn enemies of the Jews, he can reveal who he is and he can be safe. Right. But yet he can't even do that right now.
He cannot.
His own people.
Yeah, he cannot be safe among his own people. And we have seen that, that he, and that element of the story will continue to escalate, right? So we'll be watching for that. Yeah, what a great point. Okay, so I am who I am is what God says in Exodus 3. Tell them I am has sent me to you. Ego eimi is the Greek version of that, so we get it in the Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament. But Jesus uses this phrasing, I am, and our translators stick in he because it doesn't sound like a complete sentence in English, right? But you can just cross out that he. It's not in the original. It's just I am the one speaking to you. And Jesus does this phrase 7 times in the book of John. Right? And here's the first, right? So, we see a number 7. We know this is John doing a thing, right? He is identifying Jesus with the divine, with Yahweh, with the God of Israel. I am who speak to you. Yeah. So this is the climax of their interaction, right? The scene at the well concluded not with finding a bride, but somehow in the fulfillment of what all those lines of patriarchs were doing as they went along, the fulfillment of the line and the promise to Abraham, the Messiah. Okay, so if they will not worship in Jerusalem or on this mountain, if it will not be about holy places, if it's not about religious ethnic identities, what will it be about? It will be about Jesus. Jesus himself will be the basis for worshiping God. He has replaced both the historic well and those identities as this is how we worship God in the spirit of Jesus Christ. Well, let's look at 27 through 45. We are out of time to read that aloud, as always happens to us. But the disciples came back. At this point, the disciples came and they were amazed that he had been speaking to a woman, right? We're sort of underlining how this is a strange thing to happen. But no one said, Why are you talking to her? I think that's kind of funny, right? Yeah, I think it's meant to be humorous. Like, he's the rabbi, he's the boss. We don't just question him, right? Okay, so they don't say anything. They don't understand it, right? But Jesus understands. He's been headed to this interaction the whole time, right? It was important to him all along. And is he hesitant to talk to her because she's a woman? Is he hesitant to talk to her because she's a Samaritan? Is Jesus hesitant to bring up the deepest things of faith? No. All of this is in his conversation. He even is willing to sweep away the surface things of the struggles of life and say, this matters. And so when we see for Jesus here, Jesus is someone who thinks real discipleship and spiritual learning is not only for Jews. It's not only for the learned, right? He just met with the rabbi and the lights were out. That was all in the dark. But here in noon, in the light of the noonday, right? It's for someone who is not learned. She says, "Boy, someone else have to explain that to me. I don't know. I don't know those things." But it's still for her, and it's not only for men, because here she is addressing all of this to this woman, and Jesus sees the harvest, right? The disciples are going, what's going on with this conversation? We're not very comfortable with this. We don't know what's happening. Jesus says, look up and see the harvest. He sees a person and soon to be people who are being brought into life eternal, verse 36. They're being brought into true worship through Jesus. What is this woman's return to town like in 28 and 29? What does she do?
She goes to the man and tells them.
Yep, the men are in charge. She leaves her water pot, right? She rushes off. She goes to the men. She tells them, and she says, could this be the Christ, right? So, essentially, come and see if this is the Messiah. And so we have all the marks of discipleship that we have seen in our previous stories, right? The name, the titles of Jesus, the willingness to believe, going and bringing someone else to Jesus. And she does that. She is a messenger. She's a evangelist here. We get her sense of evangelizing an entire town, and they come and they follow Jesus. And they say, he is the one, the Savior of the world in verse 42. So we have all these prophets. We have this sense of discipleship, right? In this woman. It's not a man, it's not an Israelite, it's not a rabbi. She's a true disciple. And so are her people who come and ask Jesus to remain with them, and he stays with them for 2 days and he teaches them.
Do you think he's indicating to his disciples that the Samaritans who come with her, this group of people, are in fact the harvest, the fields?
Yes.
What do y'all think?
Yes.
Yeah, what's the harvest? Why is he talking about the harvest there?
It's kind of saying that because the disciples are trying to get him to eat.
Yeah.
He's already saying
His mission is what he's
yes.
about.
He's flipping it from their day-to-day concerns to something loftier.
Yeah.
Something
Yeah.
important by saying, look at these people that are here. You wouldn't normally deal with them. You wouldn't normally even get near them. But they are in fact who you need to be.
They are the harvest.
To.
Yes. They are who we minister to. They are who God cares about, right? And this is so surprising to our original audience. And so we have to sort of get into that culture so we can see how radical Jesus is. The very people, like, for ourselves, the very people that we would think least interested, least worthy, least likely to listen, these are who come to Jesus. And so we have that deep message here. Go ahead.
I think it's curious, these people, knowing who she was, believed her and went to see. Their curiosity apparently got the better of them.
Yeah, because we know she was ostracized some from her community. She had been cast out. She was vulnerable, and yet her evangelism is effective. Come and see. Yeah, absolutely. What else? Other comments?
Well, he was immediately accepted by the Samaritans.
Yeah. Unlike the Jews who range from, I haven't decided yet, to let's kill him,
Right.
the Samaritans immediately accept. Yeah, yeah. And an indictment for us. Like, as soon as I think that person wouldn't be interested, maybe Jesus is inviting me to look at the harvest. Maybe that person is the person who will most be interested, who will least be jaded, who will least be worried about their own power, and who will be willing to come. Right? And so I have to think in those terms. Come and see. Go ahead, Chris.
It's interesting in 42, they said to the woman, "It is no longer because of your words that we believe, for we have heard for ourselves, and we know that this is indeed the Savior of the world."
The Savior of the world.
There's no expression making the faith of your fathers your own faith, and they've just done that.
Yes, yeah, yeah. They started because of her testimony, and testimony matters. And now they have their own testimony that he is the Savior of the world. Yeah. What else? Thoughts, other, as we close?
I think this is a powerful message for us today in terms of, in a time of such diversity, not always a good sort of diversity in terms of our hatred and animosity toward different groups and people, racism, etc., wars between countries and peoples, and all that. Through Jesus, we can come together, and probably no other way, because we will continue to have these problems as they did then. We see it all around us in our own country and across the world.
Yeah, and real differences, right? The northern and southern kingdoms literally had wars between them, where it was two communities of Israelites fighting wars against each other. That's the history.
And still do.
Indeed. And so we have that sense that, like, differences are real and Jesus still transcends them. Yeah, what a great point. Well, Jesus has turned around the trope of finding a bride at the well. He's not looking for a wife. He's looking for disciples. He's doing the work of God, looking for the worshipers that God seeks. And so he's challenging people, whether men or women, religious insider or religious outsider, ruling class or outcast, to become those worshipers that the Father is seeking. Jesus is discipling this woman, and through her, a whole village, building the foundation that will be the church out of unexpected people. And so Jesus found not a bride, but the bride of Christ, the people of God, beginning with those we would least expect. Thus, we have completed all 4 of the Jewish institutions that John shows Jesus addressing in the first quarter of John, right? In each institution, Jesus replaces the theological function of the institution with himself. So Jesus is at the wedding, Jesus is the groom at the messianic banquet that celebrates the coming salvation. At the temple, Jesus is the new temple, the new overlapping of heaven and earth, the new place where God dwells with God's people right in our midst. And with Nicodemus, Jesus is the new teacher of Israel, the one who brings light into the darkness. And here at the well, Jesus and the Spirit of Jesus Christ to come is the new center of worship for the people of God. And Jesus is beginning to create the people of God right there at the well. So thank you for your discussion today. We'll be meeting next week for lesson 5, Jesus healing at the pool in Bethesda. And the reading will be, I've given you 2 passages, one in John 5 and one in John 7. Of course, if you read all the way in between, it's richer. And I've given you a reading schedule where you can use 5 days of reading to cover that if you would like. Thanks so much, everyone.
It was a great lesson. It just had so much for us. I do have our prayer today. Briefly before we start, Sharon, you had something, can you explain a little bit about the concern you had about your family and the truckers and that type of thing?
My brother and my nephew are truck drivers.